morning, everybody. It is Man Coverage with Knoxville Nate and Rico McCoy. It is January 2nd, 2022, if you can believe that. We are experiencing a missing person today as Coach McCoy, Rico, our good man, is down for the count and feeling sick. Thus, we have brought in our Midwest correspondent, Mr. James Bonneville, to step up and help us out today. How are you doing this morning, James?
I'm doing great. Sometimes you got to bring the twos in.
Hey, buddy, you are no two. You are a one, and we have you on the show all the time. We love what you do. Hell, even when Rico's here, you're on the show. So we like it when you join us, and I'm just glad you could step in.
Hey, I wish I just could be the pretty face that Rico is. He brings a lot to the table, and hopefully I can live up to his image and what he's brought to the show.
He is a good-looking guy, and
he is.
Was a hell of a football player.
Absolutely.
We don't talk about it all that often on the show because he's a very, very modest guy. He doesn't like to pump himself up, but this guy was a 3-time All-SEC linebacker and led the Tennessee Volunteers to their last SEC championship game in 2008. So we love our boy Rico. I hope he's watching. I hope he feels better soon, and I hope he gets to come back and join us. But I'm sorry he's not here because we've got a lot to talk about today. I've got to be honest. There's been a lot of talk the last few years about how the bowl season doesn't mean anything anymore. With kids opting out, which we'll get into later, with the playoff, with the 4-team playoff, all that type of stuff. People say, bowls don't matter. No one watches those bowl games. They don't really matter. I think this bowl season, Bonneville, has told us all that it does matter. These kids care. I don't know if you watched, for example, we just talked about Rico playing for Tennessee. I don't know if you watched the Tennessee-Purdue game. I don't know if you watched the Ohio State Utah game, but all those kids look to me like they cared. What do you think, James?
Absolutely. I mean, you go back to that Tennessee, that Music City Bowl. I mean, if you missed that, you missed a treat. My wife is yelling at me to stop watching so we can eat dinner. It was like I kept telling her, I'm like, if I put my phone down for 1 second, the game could completely change because it was such a street fight. I mean, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And the entire time I'm sitting there thinking about it, like we were texting back and forth about this. What if a George Karlaftis plays in the game? What if a David Bell plays in this game? I mean, that could even elevate their draft stock even higher because a lot of people across the country don't know who a David Bell is. In Big Ten country, everybody knows him. He's the best receiver in the conference, which is saying a lot because I've never seen the conference this stacked with receivers. And George Karlaftis, since the second he came on campus, has been dominating. And you put him on that stage in that game, it would have been fantastic. I mean, NFL scouts have been drooling all over each other.
I agree. Purdue was able to pull it out. Yeah. But the whole time I was watching it, I was thinking, if they had Bell, if they had their All-American defensive end, I think the game would have been a little bit more one-sided, to be honest.
I mean, but there was more care in that game than I've seen in some time. I mean, I could, if I'm a Tennessee fan right now, I'm excited for what Josh Heupel has brought to that program. It's probably the most excited I've seen since you got to go back to, T. Martin playing quarterback. I mean, it's really amped up on that level. And I love to see the players that they're going to bring into that program, especially at quarterback and on the defensive side of the ball. They play an exciting brand of football.
Yeah, no, you have to give this guy credit for what he's done this year. To win, yeah. I know they lost that game, but to win 7 games with that roster is absolutely phenomenal in my opinion. And kudos to Coach Heupel. I wasn't 100% sure that he'd be able to come in and fix this, not because he can't coach, just because this is a big task.
This is a complete renovation where you're ripping out the foundation too as well. I mean, we talked about this a long time ago. I know Kirby Smart was big SEC Coach of the Year, but honest to God, if you really want to give it to somebody, Shane Beamer or Josh Heupel, really should have been considered, because what they were dealing with just to make it to a bowl game was shocking. I mean, I think the over-unders for them in Vegas was like 2, maybe 3 tops, 3 wins, and they go 7-8. I mean, I mean, what more can you say? I mean, outside of Baylor and Michigan winning 2 games last year and going to 11-12 this year, I mean, it's crazy.
Yeah, so I think they finished 7-7.
They did,
right?
Tennessee.
Yeah, I think they were 7-7, right?
I think so, or 7-6.
Yeah, 7-6.
Yeah.
So wins, regardless, to win 7 games is pretty impressive in my opinion.
Absolutely.
They played, and the whole beginning of this topic was those guys played hard, and they weren't in the Final Four, and so I really believe the bowl season is still alive. These guys cared. These guys played tough, and kudos to all the guys that went out there and did play. And obviously, I we'll get into the opt-out situation a little bit later. I want to talk at length about that. Not right now, but I do want to get into that and discuss it. First off, I want to talk about the big-time games. I want to talk about the college football playoff. Why don't we start with number 1? Why don't we start with Alabama? We all know about Nick Saban. We all know about the Crimson Tide. They seem to win the national championship every season. And they, this was the one year where I looked at them and was like, this is not their strongest team.
No.
I think maybe they've had better ball clubs than this prior to this season. However, they may have the 2 most electric players they've ever had. Will Anderson Jr. on defense, Bryce Young on offense. Those 2 guys they make up, in my opinion, they make up for a lot of deficiencies. And the offensive line has finally come together. It took a while, but, Brian Robinson Jr. running for 204 yards against a Cincinnati defense that's been pretty stout all year. I was pretty impressed. What do you think?
It's funny to look at that game plan that Mike Denbrock put together. They were going to make Alabama run against him. They were not going to let them throw all over him, which kind of shocked me. I mean, granted, when you've got between Gardner and who's the other corner? Bryant.
Yeah.
I mean, they've got the best 2 corners in the country, bar none. Yeah. I mean, there'd be people out there saying different, but when those 2 guys are going to be drafted very early in the draft, Alabama, I mean, Cincinnati wanted to take away the pass from them and make Alabama beat them on the ground because their offensive line did have problems at points during the season. You can't say that for the last 4 games. Alabama's offensive line, especially against Georgia, looks stout. And it showed. I mean, especially with John Mechie out. I'm kind of shocked how they didn't throw another guy in that box and really try to put pressure on that offensive line to open up holes for Robinson. But they kept to their game plan, and Luke Fickell is very systematic in that way, and it cost them in the game. I mean, but you can't take anything away from Cincinnati. They deserve to be there. There's a reason why they were there. But the offensive line play, or the line of scrimmage play, was dictated the entire game.
Yeah, they kind of got shoved around a little bit. But, they made it. They were undefeated. They won all their games. I don't like the talk about how they didn't deserve to be there. I do believe they deserved a shot. Let's be honest. They got a little bit screwed in the rankings. They had to play the number 1 team. They got ranked 4th. That put them up against Bama. Maybe not the best situation, best matchup for them. But I did like how they stopped the passing game. They pretty much shut it down in the sense that, Alabama only threw for 181 yards. So that was pretty impressive.
The passes per completion was at 6.4 yards per completion. I'm trying to remember the stat where Bryce Young usually averages 8 to 9 yards of completion. I mean, that just shows the strength of that secondary and that 3-3-5 that Mike Denbrock set up, which you'll soon have in LSU next year.
Yeah, no, it was a great performance by their defense. I liked the game plan. The problem was, they couldn't stop the run. And we talked about it, over the weekend, how, the game started and they just started running it down their throats. And I was like, this could be a long day. if they can't stop the run, and they weren't able to. I mean, Alabama ran for over 300 yards. Brian Robinson Jr., like I said, 26 carries, 204 yards, 7.8 yards a carry. It's tough to win a ball game when you're giving up 8 yards a clip. That's no matter who you're playing. It's very difficult to win when you're giving up 8 yards a carry to the number one back. And kudos to Brian Robinson. Let's talk about this guy for a second. He's waited his turn. You know, he never started a game in 40, 50 games he's been at Alabama. This year was the first year that he's ever started. And this kid sat, he waited, he didn't hit the transfer portal. He stayed where he was, and he finally got his shot, and he made it happen. This is what it's all about, in my opinion. I love how this kid waited for his turn. He got his opportunity, and now look what he's done with it. He's going to make himself a pro football player by what he did against Cincinnati, in my opinion.
Honestly, I think I think you're going to see a evolution on the transfer portal in the next 4 to 5 years, because some players are going to see it's not always greener on the other side of the fence. You could be dealing with completely different problems and regret moving away from what you had. I think just because it's new, a lot of players are doing it because they want to get on the field quicker to showcase what they have. But I mean, you look at Robinson, he's a Tuscaloosa kid. You know, this is a guy who grew up with the Crimson Tide. And it's just good to see him get a showing, because in the last few years, the receivers have been the class of Alabama. And you've seen it kind of dwindle down, that maybe they go back to the running game and more their base roots of who they are.
Yeah, they definitely were a running team the other day. That was kind of cool to see. And, you know, what can you say about Nick Saban? I know he gets a lot of credit, but he probably deserves even more credit than he gets. I mean, this is phenomenal what he's done at Alabama to continue this type of success for this long. It's not easy. I know he makes it look easy, but it's not. And that's why these other programs that are out there, they get mad, you know, if they lose one game, like the Buckeyes, like Clemson, you know, but it's like, it's not easy to go in, year out, and win every single game. I know he makes it look that way, but it's really not.
And the foundation is really set in the spring and summer with him. You know, they get so precise in what they do, because a lot of people forget year one at Alabama, they lost at home to Louisiana Monroe.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, they ain't losing to Louisiana Monroe anymore.
If they do, that could be a sign of the apocalypse.
Yeah, no, they're pretty much on point, and they're going to another national title game. So, you know, congratulations to them. I'm getting a little sick of seeing it, to be honest, but you know, they're damn good, and they deserve all the credit they get. Now, in the other matchup, we had another SEC team taking on the Big Ten champion. I won't say their name, but they have that little weird thing on their helmets, and they wear the maize and blue. You know, this game to me kind of went how I thought it would. To be honest, I did not think that Michigan was going to be able to run on Georgia's defense. I did not think that, you know, that Stetson Bennett was going to have to throw the ball that much, although he played pretty well when he had to throw it. But, you know, the Georgia offensive line dominated the Michigan defensive line. And that was kind of surprising to me after watching, you know, the couple weeks ago when Ohio State's offensive line had a big problems with Aiden Hutchinson and the crew. Georgia did not. And they kind of pushed around Michigan's defensive line all day, and they pretty much neutralized Aiden Hutchinson, who didn't really make a play all day long.
And honestly, you nailed it on the head. They realized early on that their tackles could handle Ojabo and Hutchinson on the outside, which left their guards. I mean, Georgia's offensive line isn't as good as it's been in the past. They had struggles, and you've seen that day where they really handled it, and Michigan never got creative on their defensive side of the ball. They did a lot of base stuff, and it hurt them. I mean, and then you look at the offensive side of the ball. There were two telling points in the game where everything flipped. and one was on the first series that Michigan had where they went for it on fourth down. They needed to score some points in that first drive, and when they didn't get that 4th and 4 on the 41 of Georgia, and Georgia just screams down and scores another touchdown, the game was over. You could just see the body language right there on Michigan's sideline. They knew it was going to be a long day. I mean, heck, in the first half, Georgia did not have a third and more than 3, unless it was inside the Michigan 20 in the entire first half. And Michigan and Georgia are not good third down teams. They're not good third long. And Michigan just played right into Georgia's hands. I mean, they should have. There was one play early in the game where it was a passing play, and they just rushed the front 4, kind of like what Bob Stoops used to do at Oklahoma when he had Tommy Harris, and drop back 7 because they didn't think the quarterback was going to run. They did it one time, and the rest of the game they kept away from it. And they should have had put J.J. McCarthy in and let him go.
Yeah, that was the question I was going to ask you, because I'm a little bit confused. You know, they say that Cade McNamara is their starter. They say he's their quarterback. They talk about how great he is, and then it gets to third down, and they take him out.
Yeah.
So that confuses me. I mean, and this guy's coming back next year, and they're going to have both these guys again. Don't you have to pick one and leave him out there full time? I mean, I just don't like this inserting the quarterback. It's not fair, in my opinion, to the other guy. You know, bringing him off the bench. He hasn't been out there all day. And then it's, you know, the second, third series of the game, it's 3rd and 4, and you run McCarthy out there. And I don't think that's fair to him or McNamara. What do you think about this quarterback deal?
Well, I think we can go back to a conversation we've had many years ago about a certain coach people call the old ball coach, and Steve Spurrier, who used to do this routinely at Florida with, I mean, heck, a Heisman Trophy winner in Steve Spurrier, in Danny Werfel. And I don't get it, because I think you lose the offense could lose confidence in that guy depending on what the situation is. You could be a complete tell of what they're doing on the other side of the ball. And now the quarterbacks are constantly pressing themselves. I personally don't like it. You got to go with the girl that brought you and see what happens from there. And if things change, you make the change. Kind of like what Utah did, going from Charlie Brewer to Cam Rising. And look what things happened there. They went from a team that probably would have gone to the Las Vegas Bowl to the Rose Bowl.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that you just have to keep the guy that's your starter on the field. Yeah. I mean, this is the guy that you say is your starting quarterback. You name him your starting quarterback. It's 3rd and 4. Leave the guy in and let him see what he can do. I just don't understand the throwing a different guy out there. And I'm interested to see what happens for next year, whether they have a true competition and whether they open it up. You know, McNamara is setting himself up for something here because he's coming back and he's supposedly competing. What if he gets beat out? He's just going to sit on the bench all year long and be the backup to McCarthy. I mean, that's going to be pretty awkward.
Yeah. I mean, in this day and age, that means he's transferring right there. He's not going to wait around. I mean,
that's what I was getting at.
I mean, it's just these coaches are now looking at their 2 and 3 depth chart constantly and trying to balance out playing time. I mean, I was wondering that about Ohio State's receiving core all year. Like, how are they going to keep everybody happy?
It's difficult. Being a college football coach is a lot harder these days, just because you still have, the recruiting that you've always had, but then you have to be, then you have to kind of make everybody happy, and you have to keep everybody happy, no matter who it is, because anybody can leave at any time. And there's no, having to sit out a year. You can take off and, take your wares elsewhere whenever you want to. And that's a scary proposition for some of these guys. But, we've got the college football national championship is set. We have a rematch of the SEC championship game. Georgia handled their business. Alabama handled their business. The question now is, what happens? Do we see the same game that we saw in the SEC championship game? Does Alabama dominate Stetson Bennett in Georgia, or does Georgia and Kirby Smart change things up and try and make this thing a little bit more interesting and have a chance. I know that Georgia's favored in this game, but they did kind of get smacked around a little bit in the SEC championship game. Who, in your opinion, James, who wins this game, and how does this game go?
Well, what's the line right now? I haven't seen the line quite yet.
I believe it's 2.5.
2.5 to Georgia.
Yeah.
I personally, with over under 52.5, I personally would go with Georgia in this one, and the reason being is John Mechie being out. Now you could really, roll your coverage over onto Jamison Williams, and really make Bama struggle. I think. I mean, granted, Bill O'Brien's a smart guy. I mean, people, maybe be down on him, but he doesn't have the talent level that Steve Sarkisian had when you have 4 first-round draft picks at receiver and quarterbacks who are first-round draft choices. He doesn't have that here. There isn't the depth. And I think you take that away, and if Georgia can just get out of 3rd and long, I think they have a chance of winning this game and getting the monkey off their back and people stop talking about 1980 and Herschel Walker.
Yeah, it's been a while since they've actually won a title. The other thing is, Nick Saban's got a pretty tremendous record against his former assistants. What is he?
Agreed.
24-1. I think he's 4-0 against Kirby Smart. It hasn't really been done as far as a coach coming in and being a former assistant of Nick Saban coming in and taking him to task. So this will be a first if they can do it. But I feel like if there was any time where Georgia could potentially beat Alabama, I feel like it's this game. They've already played once. They've figured out what worked and what didn't work. The question is, for me at least, you have to look at the quarterback position. And I look at the quarterback position, and I feel like, this guy playing for Bama, Bryce Young, he's better. I mean, I'm sorry. I hate to beat a dead horse and to point out something that's very obvious, but it is obvious. This guy is a better quarterback than Stetson Bennett is. And Stetson played pretty well against Michigan, but this isn't Michigan. This is Alabama. They are they're a very good football team. Will Anderson Jr. is the best defensive player in the country, in my opinion.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter if you roll your protection to him. It doesn't matter if you have 2 guys blocking him, double team him, chip him. It doesn't matter. This guy can beat anybody and get in the backfield. It seems like he starts the play in the backfield a lot of the times. I know he's not, but it seems like he does.
If you get a chance to watch the All-22, they did one of the cast of the All-22 and they cut out the announcers of the Cincinnati Alabama game. You truly get an appreciation for Will Anderson even more. Like, he was dominating on such a level that I think he's top 3 in the draft. Easy.
Oh, I agree. I think he's the best defensive player in the country. And to be honest, if I'm picking number 1, and if I am, I need a defensive lineman, that's who I'm taking. I mean, that's what I'm doing. If defense is my main point of emphasis, if I've already got my quarterback in place, I'm taking this guy. He never takes plays off. He's got a high motor, high energy. He seems to love football, and the upside to him is just unstoppable. I mean, he's the most dominant player. He's the most dominant player in all of college football, in my opinion, and he's a guy that we already knew about. And so to be able to dominate like that when people already know who you are and they're already thinking about you and game planning against you, that's what's really impressive to me.
Yeah, I agree 100%.
So we'll see. I think it'll be a good game. I don't think we're going to have, I know some people were a little bit upset about the first 2 games and how, they went because they were a little bit lopsided.
Yeah.
But, that we kind of expected that. We talked about it on the show a few weeks ago that we kind of expected that to happen. We figured that Bama would take care of business. We figured that Georgia would take care of business. But, things can change in a game. I mean, if we talk about last night and the Ole Miss Baylor game, I mean, I'm sure nobody expected that game to go that way when Matt Corral, decides to play, but then goes down and gets injured. That definitely affected the rest of that game. So, things can change in a dime. And I wanted to talk a second about that game. Got to be impressed with Dave Aranda and what he's done at Baylor, right?
Hey, honestly, how can you not like Dave Aranda? I mean, this is a guy who came up the hard way. I mean, his career ends early in college, and he goes to, coaches at his alma mater, and then gets fired at one point at Hawaii, and Gary Anderson brings him to Utah State. And that's the first time I got to see him, because they played Wisconsin and Auburn that year at Utah State, and they took him to the end. Yeah. And really in both games should have won. And that's when he got on my radar, because I'm like, he's taking a bunch of guys who aren't even second level, but really third level, and taking on top 10 teams and taking them to the brink. And look at where he's been since then.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty impressive. And, definitely one of the biggest turnarounds in college football history. And, this was not – nobody was talking to me about how Baylor was going to come out and dominate this season. I mean, I didn't hear anyone talking about that. No one was giving them a shot. I didn't hear anything in the preseason about Baylor, potentially winning the Big 12 and playing in the Sugar Bowl. And, they did it Dave Aranda way. They played defense. That defense was unbelievable last night. I mean, talk to me about Terrell Bernard. 17 tackles, 2 sacks, 2 tackles for loss, a pass defense. I think he blocked a punt too.
Yeah.
I mean, this guy was all over the field. And then, they had 2 guys that got interceptions. One, JT Woods, had 2 interceptions, and then Al Walcott, got that other tip ball and took it back 96 yards. So they are a defense that is good on every level. They have a really strong defensive line that can get after the quarterback and can stop the run. They've got unbelievably athletic, phenomenal linebackers, and then they have a tremendous secondary. I mean, their quarterback threw for 40 yards, and they won by 2 touchdowns. I mean,
yeah. Hey, I have to say is this. Give it 2 to 3 years, and you start getting Aranda guys in there. I mean, it was testament watching him at Wisconsin. That's when their linebackers, when they became really linebacker in the Big Ten. Because out of the blue, all of a sudden this guy would be starting. Next thing you know, he's going to be in the NFL. You're saying his name by week 5, how this guy's amazing. And he knows how to develop these guys. And he's got great zone blitz schemes. He is so disciplined.
Their defense was unbelievable last night. Yeah. I couldn't believe. I mean, I understand that Corral went down. I understand. Yeah. I give Corral a ton of credit for playing in this game, because this is a guy who was going to get drafted, probably in the 1st or 2nd round. Yeah. But let's be honest. He was 2 of 6 for 10 yards and an interception before he got injured, and he got injured when he was getting sacked on the play. So it's not like if he would have been out there, they would have just dominated this game. He was struggling before he got injured. So, I'm not going to sit here and say if Corral plays, they win. Baylor looked pretty damn good before that. So, obviously putting a freshman out there, he looked like a freshman at times, but made some good throws in Altamar. Yeah. But I got to give Dave Aranda credit, man. I thought somebody would come and hire this guy away from Baylor, but apparently not.
Honestly, I thought the USC job. I kept going over and over my head. I'm like, he's a perfect fit for USC. I mean, there's a lot of Pete Carroll in him. I mean, both come from a defensive side of the ball. Obviously, Pete's a little more dynamic in nature, but I mean, could you imagine what he could do in the Pac-12 with that defense? I mean, we could be going back to the good old days of USC. And don't get me wrong, I think Lincoln Riley's going to do a fine job, but it's going to be more offensively based. I mean, they're going to throw the ball up a lot, try to score 40.
Yeah, no, that's what I was thinking. And, if he can get this group of guys to trust him and to believe in him, he talked about that after the game, was the trust that he was able to get from these guys to believe in what he was preaching. And a lot of these guys that I mentioned, from their defense could have taken off. could have gone elsewhere. I mean, even before all the portal, if you have a coaching change, they used to let guys leave, and a lot of guys could have jumped ship and could have gone elsewhere, but they stayed. They believed in what Aranda was saying, and they made it happen. And I give him a lot of credit for not only keeping those guys there, but what he was able to do with them. But like you said, wait till he's able to get some guys in. They had one of the biggest turnarounds in NCAA football history. They won 12 games for the first time in Baylor football history. And now he's going to be able to keep a lot of that Texas talent right there in Waco, right?
Absolutely. I mean, remember in 2020, he went 2-7, and he got hired late after Matt Rule went to Carolina.
Yeah.
Now you give this guy another year, it's going to be spooky what's going down in Waco.
Yeah, I agree. And a big time performance on a big time stage. And like I said, nobody was talking to me about Baylor and them being a potential team to make a big time January 1 bowl game. So
I would have said going to a bowl game would have been a freaking victory in this team, and they go to the Sugar Bowl and win it.
Yeah. I mean, and you know, just by looking at Oklahoma State, and we'll talk about that game here in a second, but being able to beat them and win the Big 12 championship, that's impressive. Even more impressive now when we go back and talk about that, because Oklahoma State was able to take down the Irish even after getting down quite a bit. I think it was 28-7. If I'm not incorrect on that. But before we talk about that, why don't we discuss a little bit about the granddaddy of them all? Because, James, we've got Bobby Carpenter here. We're going to bring him in because he doesn't have too much time. We want to get him in with us before we lose him.
Absolutely.
Bobby, what's up, brother? You hear us, Bobby?
Yeah, I got you now. For some reason, it doesn't come through my headset. Yeah.
How you doing today, bud?
I'm doing well, guys. How you guys doing?
We're doing wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us. And while we're here, why don't we get right to it? I want to get your impressions of that ball game yesterday and the Buckeyes being able to come back. Obviously, 35-21 halftime. Defense was not looking great, but things turned around in the second half. And we're able to get some stops. What did you think about the Buckeyes' performance?
Yeah, I think it was definitely gritty in the second half. Ryan talked about it, and their desire to have, come in there and step it up, play tougher football. And you saw they're just getting bled in the first half. And it's a lot of what Michigan kind of looked like, where you're just getting oozed, where there's no firm point of attack at all. And so to hold them to 10 points in the second half, I thought was very impressive. Did a really good job. I mean, they're understaffed. I think they maybe dressed 4 or 5 healthy linebackers. That's why they had to move. And that was including Cade Stover. So moving him over there, trying to get that done. It was big time, and just really like the mentality that they had. I mean, it's hard sometimes when you're getting run over to come in at halftime, regroup, address the problems and get those things fixed. And they really did it, in a pretty big way against one of the teams I think people thought was one of the hottest teams in the country coming in with how they'd played the last 3 weeks of the season. And I think the last piece, like before the game, I'd done a bunch of media stuff and talked to a bunch of people about it. And I kind of put my number. It was like, if they can hold them to under 120 yards rushing, I was like, it should be a pretty nice game for fans to watch. You should feel good about it. It's like they can still win if they give up more yards than that on the ground, but it'll be a little bit uncomfortable. And I guess, that uncomfortable win was a 3-point victory with like 7 seconds left on the clock.
Yeah, there's no doubt. And as you mentioned, they were playing a little shorthanded. I mean, Garrett opted out. We had these 5 guys that were starters on defense that were missing. Let's be honest, the defense hasn't been our strong point all year long anyway. But the linebacker position is one that very well, and that's been a struggle for us all season long. But as you mentioned, I feel like Cade Stover came in and played pretty well considering he's been a tight end all year. And then Steele Chambers is a guy that was a running back last year, and I feel like he's gotten better year by year. So talk to us just a little bit more about that position and what you see going forward with them. And also, I wanted to get your take on the defensive coordinator coming in next year, Knowles from Oklahoma State. What do you feel about that hire, and what do you think he can do with these guys on D?
Jim Knowles I'll start with him first. He does a good job. They're very multiple at Oklahoma State. They're really good this year. They had, I believe every starter in their top 11 was a fourth-year player or older. So the ability to have veteran guys allows you to be multiple. And that was part of the problem this year on Ohio State is they were very young, especially at the second and third levels. And then when they had these injuries, you have guys like Dallas Gant, Kayvon Pope, leave in the middle of the season, veteran players who could have added something. And definitely as injuries happened and things got stretched, could have played a role, through the final 4 or 5 weeks of the season. But I think Jim Knowles, he'll get it cleaned up. A lot of it is just watching the second half versus the first half. They were more firm against the run. They were better tacklers. Like that's a mentality. That's things that are practiced. That's things that are worked on. And those come obviously as the players improve with experience as well. So that's a big piece of it. And then, you talked, Cade Stover coming over. I don't think people truly understand how difficult it is, to shift positions mid-season and especially shift sides of the ball. Like, you don't practice tackling on offense. And that's your primary thing that you need to be able to do on defense. If you cannot tackle, you cannot be on the field. And so for him to switch over and do that, and I liked it. I got a chance to see him in practice. He's a big physical body, and the matchup works perfectly for what Utah liked to do, to get 2 tight ends on the field. You could get him down on the line of scrimmage, pound on that tight end wing, help give the defense an edge. He did a pretty good job. I think he had 6 tackles. Steele's coming along. He's really athletic. He can make plays. He's still getting a feel, and that's why you see some inconsistencies in his play. Some weeks it's better than others, but I think he's going to be very good, and he's shown a lot of flashes of it this far. The guy I think that stole the show yesterday was Tommy Eichenberg. And if you think at how maligned and everybody was on him, and just watching early on in the season, whether it's him or Cody Simon, and Steele, like things didn't necessarily look good early on in the year. And a lot of that was due to like some inconsistencies up front with the defensive line. And when things aren't giving you a clear picture and you're a young player, you're not all that experienced, it's going to be really difficult to handle that. And I thought Tommy and those guys came a long, long way. And, to see a guy who people were talking about how he shouldn't even be on the field and he played 80 snaps and no tackles, to have 17 tackles in a game is incredibly difficult. I mean, I don't care what type of game it is, everything, like to be able to do that. And he made some really nice plays. You saw him being more aggressive. And I try to explain to people, everybody remembers guys their last season at Ohio State. And they remember how good they were, their juniors and senior year. Very few people remember and look back at some of the growing pains. And I look at some of the struggles I had as a freshman and as a sophomore. I'd get on the field and you'd make some plays, but you'd give some up. And the same thing with AJ and James Laurinaitis. All these guys will tell you that they were infinitely better their junior and senior years than they were as a freshman or as a sophomore and as a first-year starter. And that's what Cade Stover or Tommy Eichenberg was this year. Is he hadn't really played much football, and a lot of that was due to the linebackers. They had 4 seniors last year and a COVID-shortened year, so these guys didn't get any real game reps. So finally, after a full season and a tough physical game, to watch Tommy Eichenberg step up and play like that, it really warmed my heart.
I was just going to say the same thing about him. It seemed like in the third and fourth quarter, that's the only name you kept hearing. He just kept wrapping up so well, where in the first half, it seemed like a lot of people were just trying to hit with the shoulder and just try and knock him down. And Eichenberg just had that old school mentality in the third and fourth quarter, especially. It just seemed like it was just the repeat that you kept hearing his name getting called over and over for the tackle.
Yeah, and his ability to diagnose plays, shoot through there, making some in the backfield. It wasn't like they were 10 yards down the field. So, he was a big piece of that defense firming up. And I mean, I'm a true believer. It's tough to have a great defense without having great linebackers. This year, there's a little bit of struggles there, but you saw the second half, I think some flashes. And hopefully in the future, you don't have to get to that point where obviously you have a very underwhelming first half by any standard, but the ability then to step up and get the job done and get some of those key stops in the second half like that. It was very, very impressive. And I was very proud of those guys.
Yeah, I was too. And Bobby, you've been around Buckeye football for a long time, and you know that our fans are bonkers crazy, and they are. I mean, I'm one of them, but I'm not one of those people that's ready to give up on the season after we lose one game or fire the coach because we lose one game. But there are those people out there, and so there was a lot of pressure in this game, in my opinion, and it doesn't make it any easier by having two of the greatest receivers in our history, Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson, obviously opting out. But I wasn't too worried about that, considering we had JSN and we had Marvin Harrison Jr. and those guys. But just talk to me a little bit. I want to hear your thoughts about, obviously, Smith and Jigba had a phenomenal game, one of the greatest bowl games in the history of college football, but also Marvin Harrison Jr. and what he was able to do. I mean, his performance got a little bit overshadowed because of Jackson Smith and Jigba, but he had a pretty damn good game too.
He played really well, and that was probably the position that you could afford guys to opt out of the most. And while they weren't as experienced at the wide receiver position outside of Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave, who had made a lot of plays and played a ton of snaps for this Ohio State team, with those guys opting out, it was going to give those young guys a chance to shine. And everyone has been critical a little about Jameson Williams and being down at Bama. The reason Jameson Williams wasn't going to get on the field as much as he would have liked this year, and he would have played a lot, was because of Jackson Smith and Jigba. So Brian Hartline knew what he had right there. He had witnessed it. You saw at the end of the season with some of those guys, Olave and Wilson, getting nicked up at times, kind of opened some things up for him and what he was going to be able to do. So very, very impressive from that standpoint. I don't think anybody anticipated that, but I did think he would have I did think he'd have a good game. If you would have told me that 150 yards and 2 touchdowns, that's one thing. Having 350, I mean, that's just absurd. But you talk about, obviously, Marvin Harrison Jr., what he was able to do, very, very important, did a really good job. But then also, Emeka Egbuka, I mean, he got one of his kickoff returns called back, and he's ripping those things down the line. He's really talented. You saw him make some plays. Julian Fleming made some plays. Like, they have 3 really good young guys that they're going to have to integrate into this offense next year. They're relentless workers. Brian Hartline does a great job of identifying the right type of players as far as skill and personality type and their desire to work and their desire to be part of a team and go compete. And so those guys, you're going to see this here for the next couple of years. And my hope is just that Brian Hartline stays at Ohio State for as long as he wants.
Hey, I got a question for you, Bobby. Would you, comparing old school to new school, you look at Olave, Wilson, and Smith and Jigba versus Glenn, Galloway, and Boston. Who do you think would be better between those two groups?
I mean, that's tough. I mean, David came in. The thing was, these guys were all kind of clustered together age-wise. David was a freshman in 96. Terry was there in 97 or 95 with Joey, but didn't play a lot. I love Joey. Joey's one of the fastest players. He might be the fastest guy I've ever been around in my life, to tell you the truth. He's a remarkable athlete. And absolutely tremendous. And it never got a chance to be around David all that much. I played with Terry for 2 years in Dallas. And, for a guy who I grew up watching, Terry Glenn, and then seeing him at the end of his career, I mean, he was still remarkable. For my money, the season he put together in 95, with just how offenses have changed now, how much they threw the ball, the type of passing games. There was no targeting. They didn't call PI the same way. I mean, Terry's not a big dude, and he would go climb the ladder and go get the football. And, him and Olave remind me a little bit of each other with how smooth they are with their breaks. Terry has huge hands and would catch absolutely everything. I have a hard time taking anybody over Terry Glenn just because he was the guy of my childhood that I loved watching. Yeah. And then getting a chance to actually play with him and seeing that firsthand in the NFL and listening to other guys just rave about him and watching him take big hit after big hit and make catches. I always will have to lean on Terry, individually. As a group, those 3 guys, I think collectively with where they're at now, number of games, they're going to have better statistics. But it's tough because you're asking me to choose against guys who I grew up watching, and really idolizing, and then guys who I've got to know who are really good players, and they're going to make some great pros as well.
Yeah. We'll talk about watching guys play. I was lucky enough to live in Columbus. I played at Ohio Wesleyan, and then after graduated, lived in Columbus and got to watch Schlegel, Hawk, and Carpenter. And I shall never forget that, as you guys dominated for years. And, Bobby, we really appreciate you coming on the show today. Just before we let you go, I got a last question here. What does this do for the Buckeyes, being able to come back and win this game? And, after the first half, especially, and after what happened in the game that occurred up north, how does this help the Buckeyes going forward? And what do you expect going into next year?
Well, you heard everybody address it, getting that bad taste out of their mouth. Like, they're not going to forget the Michigan loss, but you at least didn't have to wait, 300 days to avenge and go get a win and feel good about something. And I don't necessarily believe in like team momentum coming out of the bowl game, as far as what that'll do for your team. But I do believe in the ability to have momentum on an individual player basis. And you look at like what some of the receivers we just did, we're talking about. You look at what Tommy Eichenberg did. You look at what, CJ Stroud, Travion Henderson, a lot of these guys, what they were able to do and put together. I think you can carry that momentum over into winter conditioning into the spring. Now the coaches, they know what they had. They knew what they had before in Jackson Smith. They're like Marvin Harrison Jr., seeing him go out and play, like you can start crafting roles because it's not a projection anymore. It's not like, hey, we see this guy do it in practice. We think he can do it in games. It's we've watched him do this in games now. Let's start tailoring some things in our offense or defense to what they do well. And, for Tommy Eichenberg, I think that's a massive amount of momentum, that he was able to get going, for that linebacker group and people to kind of establish himself, as a leader in not only the unit of the linebackers, but also the whole defensive unit as well. Like, I think that's important. So being able to have that, carry that win over, it's an 11-win season. It's a Rose Bowl victory. Big Ten fared pretty well in bowl games, I believe, going 7-3, I think, if they're all done now. And, Iowa, heck, they had a good shot at winning that if they wouldn't have thrown the pick at the end. But, Big Ten fared pretty well, and I think most people are pretty impressed. And so now let's get back to work. And the standard is the standard. Their goal is to try to get to a national championship. I know they wanted it this year since it was in Indy. And, sometimes things don't work out, but they've got a good recruiting class. They've got some really talented young players, as you saw last night. And I'm excited to kind of watch these guys grow through the next 6 months.
Yeah, no doubt. I am too. And Bobby, we know you're busy. We love what you're doing all over the place. I see you at Sirius XM Big Ten Radio on Outkick. Love it, man. Keep doing what you're doing. And thank you so much for coming on and giving us a few minutes today.
Hey, my pleasure, guys. Sorry, I just we drove back from Florida yesterday, watched the games. It was a packed day, so trying to get everything unpacked today. So I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, man,
hey,
be great.
Happy New Year.
Yeah, happy New Year, Bobby. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, bye. Wow, that was Bobby Carpenter, former linebacker at the Ohio State University. His dad was an NFL player. Bobby played in the NFL. As I just mentioned, he's on Outkick. He's on the Big Ten Network. He's on 97.1. The Fan has his own show. It is called The Morning Juice on 97.1. He's all over the broadcast world, but was a hell of a football player. He's a really cool guy. And God,
I think he's got a paper out. I think he's got a paper out too, because it seemed like that guy's always working. He's always doing stuff. It's crazy.
He is, man. He's all over the place. He's like he's like the Lance Meadow of college football. He's everywhere, and I'm so glad he was able to come on with us today. He's been super busy, and like you mentioned, he was at the game yesterday, and he's been bouncing around all over the place. And to get him to come on today and give us his perspective, I think was awesome. And big. That was an important game. Yeah. People can say whatever they want to about Utah. You can say whatever you want to about the Buckeyes, but people love to hate on the Buckeyes. And if they were to lose this game, it just would have opened up a lot of a can of worms of people of criticism on the coach, on the team. And I think it was an important win. And it was not only was the win important, but the way that they won was important, because it looked like to me, and I wanted to ask Bobby this and I forgot, but it looked to me a little bit like at the beginning of the game that one team had a bunch of guys opting out and they didn't really care. And the other team had everybody there and were so damn excited to be in the Rose Bowl that they were going to do whatever it took to win. And that's what it kind of looked like in the beginning. Did it look like that way to you?
I thought so too, to tell you the truth. That's the one thing about college football is there's not that big a wide gap where you can just show up and roll the ball out in the field and you can win because you've got those, you're wearing you wearing the helmet. Those days are done, especially in bowl season. I mean, there are going to be those guys that are just going to want to win it more than you. And Utah came out fast. I mean, they came out like they were on purpose. And Ohio State, to Ryan Day's credit, I mean, there were plays you could definitely see, having watched Ohio State through the year, that they're running motion to see where those safeties are at. And I go back to the Minnesota game where once Jordan Howden went down, that's when problems started happening for Minnesota because they were trying to isolate Calvin Swenson on either Wilson or Olave, and they went deep. And all those touchdowns in the third and fourth quarter happened off that. So, I mean, they got together and they made it happen. And it's going to be interesting to see the development of that receiving core. Travion Henderson, CJ Stroud. I mean, he went from being a baby at the beginning of the year to being a Heisman Trophy finalist.
Yeah.
I mean, that's saying a lot.
Hey, you know what? I criticized him a little bit at times this year just because there were instances where he looked nervous. He was nervous. He looked like he wasn't sure what he should do. He wasn't 100% on his reads. He looked like he was a little bit, just anticipating things a little bit too quickly. The game was going a little bit too fast for him. But let's be honest, man, those days are behind him. He looked he had just as much pressure on him yesterday as he has ever had. And my God, did he deliver 6 touchdowns, almost 600 yards passing. And hell, everyone's talking about Jackson Smith and Jigba today. And as well they should be. But let's be honest, somebody had to put those balls on the money.
There were 2 passes that I keep going back to, and you know which ones I'm talking about, both in the end zone, to Marvin Harrison Jr. and to Smith and Jigba in opposite corners of the end zone. And I sat there and I'm like, that was on the money. Like, completely, if it's off by 6 inches, there's no touchdown. And it was impressive. Really, really impressive watching him deal. Like, he literally looked like he was in command of everything during that third and fourth quarter.
Yeah, dropping those balls over the outside shoulder in the end zone when they have matter of inches to catch it, get their foot down. People don't realize how hard that is, but that's one of the hardest throws in football, to get it over the defender, get it right where only the receiver can make a play on it, and get it to where he can catch it and put his foot down before hitting the pylon or before stepping out of bounds is truly a difficult task. And he made it look easy yesterday. So and give credit to Ryan Day too, because man, I don't know what the hell he said to him at halftime, but it sure made a difference because they came out not only with a lot more effort, but also it looked like they believed they could win and they could come back and take care of business. And they did that.
It's one of those things where, like, an old school coach would have done the rant and raving. I think he probably went in there, and granted, I don't know Ryan Day at all, but you could see how they could have won that game in the first half and just literally sat there on the chalkboard dialing it up. And it was a lot of it really into their wheelhouse. I mean, the only person I'm really shocked that didn't get more touches yesterday was Travion Henderson. I was expecting him to have some flare pass where he goes for 80 at some point, and it never happened.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And, we didn't really get into that with Bobby, but the Utah defense did a really good job containing him for the most part. I mean, this is a guy that was a touchdown, long, yardage play machine all year long. And it seemed like, whenever the Buckeyes got in trouble, Henderson was able to bust a long play and make it happen. Now, he still had 17 carries for 83 yards, almost 5 yards a carry. He had a good game, but he didn't have that one play where he broke it and, had 40, 50 yards in one clip. So, I think that's a lot to Utah's defense. I mean, I was very impressed with Micah Bernard, the corner who also played wide receiver, and Sewell, who played linebacker, and then also Phillips, who, had a really damn good game as well.
And was a former Ohio State commit at one point too, under Hafley.
Yeah, he was a verbal.
Yeah.
So that's impressive. And you got to remember, Ohio State lost to Oregon, and Utah kicked Oregon's ass twice. Yeah. So this matchup was not favorable for Ohio State going in.
It just goes to show you, over a 12-game season, teams evolve and mature over time. And everybody uses the damn transitive property all the time. Well, if we beat him and they beat you, we could beat you by this much. Yeah, that doesn't exist. I mean, teams at the beginning of the year are much different at the end, either better or worse. I mean, we've seen teams just completely implode because of locker room issues. And trying to keep the attention and that culture in place is the difference between a winning and a losing program in a lot of ways. And it was interesting seeing that, especially the development of C.J. Stroud. I mean, he looked like a lost puppy against Minnesota to going on the biggest stage and really commanding the game in the second half. I mean, he went from being 19 to late 20s in 1 year.
Yeah, no, I agree. And you know what? I live down here in the South now. And so all year long, all I hear is the SEC is the greatest conference in college football. Let's be honest. They have the best team in Alabama.
Yeah.
Georgia's had a good year also. Probably maybe the two best teams are in the SEC. But let's talk about this bowl season, man. I mean, the Big Ten showed up huge. I mean, you go back, look at the SEC. Auburn lost to Houston. Mississippi State got throttled 34-7 to Mississippi State, to Texas Tech. I'm thinking of Maryland took care of business against Virginia Tech 54-10. Michigan State beat Pittsburgh. Really, Purdue beat Tennessee, as we talked about. Wisconsin beat Arizona State. The only game that really, I kind of don't even look at is the Wake Forest Rutgers game, because Rutgers had no business playing in it. Yeah. But other than that, the Big Ten, I think, really showed that from top to bottom, they're a good conference. And
absolutely.
I mean, talk to me about your thoughts.
Honestly, go back to that Penn State-Arkansas game. I mean, who on the defense didn't opt out for Penn State? All their best players. They go from being predicted to win to predicting to lose when you had that many guys out. And Jahan Dotson also announces for the pros. Yeah. I mean, quite frankly, I'm shocked that Arkansas didn't win by more. But you go the regular season schedule, regular season roster, Penn State wins. That defense was lights out.
Yeah, no, I agree. And, Iowa, as Bobby was talking about, they played pretty tough. I think that was the game Bobby did. They lost 20-17 to a Kentucky team that was,
let's call them their real name. They're not Kentucky. They're Iowa South.
Yeah, pretty much.
It's the same team.
Well, you put a quarterback on Iowa's roster, and who knows, man? Instead of 10-4, you might be talking about 12-2, whatever. I mean, if they had a quarterback, I think Iowa would have, a real chance of being a contender throughout the country. I mean, you can't win games against really good teams when you have a guy that can't throw the ball more than 20 yards for a completion.
You could say the same thing about Will Levis too. I mean, he had stretches where, both he and Petrus must have been working out with Uncle Rico at the quarterback school, because it was so bad at points. It was crazy. But you look at, once again, Wan'Dale Robinson. For all you Big Ten fans out there, once again, Wan'Dale Robinson shows his head again, this time in blue and silver. But holy moly, did he put on a show in that game. Wow. He is so fast, and it'd be interesting to see him at the next level, because he reminds me so much of a Percy Harvin.
Yeah, where did he come from?
He was Mr. Football in Kentucky, and then was at Nebraska for the last few years, transferred back to Kentucky. And, heck, Will Levis is a former backup to Sean Clifford at Penn State.
Yeah, Penn State. Yeah, that's a good point. So Kentucky's team that beat Iowa was basically a bunch of Big Ten players, and that's why they were able to win. But, yeah, what a game by Wan'Dale Robinson. 10 catches, 170 yards. And was big in that victory. So
he's he is very, very fast. I mean, people don't understand how good this kid is. He never got to show how awesome he was at Nebraska just because of what their schedule is like. He is a kid at the next level that's going to do some damage.
Yeah, 104 catches this year, 1,300 yards and 7 touchdowns, 13 yards a catch with Levis at quarterback.
Yeah, with Levis at quarterback. You give him a guy like C.J. Stroud, and you tell me what he would do.
Yeah, that's pretty impressive. So, man, what a bowl season! Like we said, man, I really enjoyed watching these bowls. I thought that it was great for college football the way that a lot of these games went. I know there was guys that opted out, and you know, we talked about it throughout the show, and these kids should be allowed to opt out. As we saw with Matt Corral, he got hurt. I don't think it's going to hurt his draft stock, but what if he tore his ACL? That would hurt his draft stock. I think he's lucky that he hurt an ankle. So these guys should have the ability to protect their futures if they so choose. And the guys that decide to play, good for them as well. So I don't think it affected the bowl season at all. Guys opted out, guys played. The guys that were there played their asses off and wanted to get a win for themselves, for their team, and for their for the name on the front of their jersey and the back.
I keep going back to Jake Butt and Jalen Smith. I mean, look at how much their draft stock got hurt by getting hurt in a bowl game. And, I mean, heck, the signing bonus alone could take care of you for life. And I'm not going to I'm not going to hearken somebody trying to take care of themselves and their family too as well. So.
No, me neither. And I'm just glad that, and it was like it with the Ohio State situation, that losing Chris Olave and losing Garrett Wilson obviously is huge. Those are two of the greatest players to ever play at the Ohio State University. But you know what? It got Marvin Harrison some much needed time on the field, and it allowed us to see what Smith and Jigba could do when there wasn't two other All-Americans out there with him. We were able to focus on him a little bit more, and my God, he was uncoverable.
Okay, I got something for you, and you're going to kind of laugh at this. I wish I would have brought this up to Bobby. Don't you think JSN plays a lot like Marvin Harrison Sr.?
He does. I feel like he's bigger than. I feel like he plays like he's bigger than he is because he's not really a huge guy.
No,
but he's not easy to bring down. When he's out there running, I don't know if you saw him on all of his catches yesterday because there were a lot of them, but there were several times where there was a guy there ready to wrap him up and they couldn't do it. He either stiff-armed him or he ran through tackles. He's only 6 feet, 197 pounds, but I feel like he plays a little bit bigger than that, just like Marvin did.
Yeah, it was interesting. I kept thinking back upon his time, Harrison's time at Syracuse when Donovan McNabb was there. Yeah. And there was so much about his game that reminded me of that. And I never even thought about that until watching that Rose Bowl. So,
95 catches, 1,606 yards, 9 touchdowns, 17 yards a catch for Jackson Smith and Jigba this year.
And he's the number 3 receiver on that roster.
And he was the number 3 guy. So pretty impressive. Want to take a moment here and thank our guest, Bobby Carpenter, linebacker from The Ohio State University, Dallas Cowboys, New England Patriots, Detroit Lions, Outkick the Coverage, Sirius XM Radio, Big Ten Network. Awesome guy. Really enjoyed him on the show. And thanks to our Big Ten Midwest correspondent, James P. Bonneville, bringing it to the table today, buddy. I appreciate you. Did a great job.
Absolutely. And hey, Rico, if you hear me out there, get better, my man.
Yeah, Rico, we love you, bro. Hope you feel better. And we will be back next week, talk some more college football and break it all down here on Man Coverage. Have a great New Year, James, and I'll talk to you real soon, buddy, okay?
See you then, my man.
Bye, bud.